Can you guys let me know in the chat below if the audio sounds good? I always just want to make sure because I did just plug in a different microphone than I typically use, so let me know if that sounds good. So say hello if you're joining me here today. Let me know where you're from in the chat. I have the chat open up to the side of me here so I can hopefully read your comments as we go and answer some questions. Today we are going to be painting a Magnolia branch together. So hopefully this is going to be our finished product today. If you haven't sketched this composition out ahead of time, in the chat I have the link, or I'll have it below if you're in the description if you're watching the replay. I will have the link to the Patreon page. It's a free page, you don't have to pay anything, but I have the sketch in the supplies list, so make sure that you've sketched this out ahead of time. And yeah, if once you have it sketched out, we can get started. So if you haven't sketched it, just pause the video and then just press play whenever you're ready. Okay, so I already have my sketch done, which is actually really nice. So I'm going to get started with painting. So I have a size, I think it's a size 6 or 8 round brush. Whatever size you have will work just fine. I'm using, these are, what are they, Series 7. This one's a Series 7. This one is also Winsor Newton. Just any kind of round brush will do great. So yeah, like a size 6, a size 2. I'm going to use various colors today. My paper here is Arches Cold Press 7 by 10 is the size of this sheet. And let's get into some colors here. So got my water here. I will go ahead and you don't have to do this if you don't have this. I didn't list it below, but I'm going to use just a little spritzer bottle I have. It's so dry in New Mexico right now, and it's also just kind of getting really hot, so my paper dries really quickly here. So sometimes it's just helpful for me to have just a little bit more moisture than the average painter. And so go ahead, and if you don't have a sprayer bottle, just go ahead and wet your paper with your brush. We're going to just wet the whole top area. We're going to work on our background first, and then we'll paint our flower afterwards. So go ahead and just start getting the top wet. You don't have to get the whole, you don't have to do it meticulously, just start at the top. And I'm going to grab some indigo. And I'm just going to start dropping it in there. Kind of loosely, grab a little bit of Payne's Gray, kind of go between these two colors here. So a little bit of Payne's Gray, a little bit of indigo, and then what I like to do is kind of intermix moments of yellow. So clean that off. I'm going to grab some yellow ochre, drop just a tiny bit there, tiny bit there. And then I'm just going to go around my sketch that I have. So just kind of going right up to those pencil lines, but not crossing over. I'm using my larger brush, so I'm not going to be super meticulous in, going around all of these little leaves and petals super perfectly. Okay, trying to keep it all watery as best I can, so I don't have any of those little hard water lines. Just keeping it flowy. I kind of like these little scratchy marks here, but if you don't like them, you can just kind of try and keep it all smooth. Actually, my reference today was actually a little more on the smooth side, so I'll go ahead and cover those up a little bit. Over here. Bringing some more water to my brush because it's starting to look a little scratchy and dry. Okay. I love indigo. I feel like I always thought Payne's Gray was my favorite, like kind of dark blue color, but then I discovered indigo. And that one's definitely, it's kind of my go-to blue for everything. I just love it. It's like a really earthy blue color. Okay. It's all still wet, so I can kind of drop in some color in a few places if it looks a little lighter than I want. Come in here around this leaf. Okay. I think I'm going to drop in just a tiny bit more of this yellow ochre. Just here, maybe a little spot right there. Okay, I'll let that start to dry. And then I will come over here to this little area just underneath this leaf here next to the flower. So I'm going to go ahead and wet it first. And I'll do a wet on wet application. So wet paint on wet paper. And that water is just going to help me disperse it and diffuse that color really evenly and softly, kind of natural looking. Okay. Drop in a little bit more of that Payne's gray in there, and then I'll do this section just underneath here. These little tiny areas are a lot easier to cover because you don't have to worry about trying to keep all the edges wet like you do up here. Over here I tried to work really quickly so that I kept it all like one smooth unit, if that makes sense. Whereas over here it's just a little more easy to get that look because the water isn't going to dry as quickly. There's a little watery bit right there as well. If you got some little small crevices, you might want to use a smaller brush, but I feel pretty good using this large brush. Oh, let me wet that first. Okay, so we're doing this whole bottom area. And I'm going to try my best to keep it all from drying out as I'm painting. So I'll add the water. Some indigo, some Payne's gray. You could even use a little bit of purple if you wanted to. You can make your background whatever you want it to be. I think adding some purple to a background is actually a really beautiful look. So dropping in that indigo mix here, adding more water over here. More water. You can tell I have a lot of paint in my brush. Even when I grab water, it's still turning it all blue because there's just still so much paint in these bristles. They hold so much. This brush holds so much paint, so much water. The larger the brush, you know, the more water obviously it's going to hold. And I think the better for this kind of application, it's better to use a larger brush because it'll hold so much more water, so you can cover a lot more real estate on your paper a lot more quickly the larger the brush. So I definitely recommend using a bigger brush for this kind of technique, application, what have you. Okay, so coming right up against those little leaves there. I think that I want to also maybe drop a little moment here of some yellow ochre. I kind of forgot to do that. Let that kind of bleed around. I like moments like that because it kind of makes it so like the background's kind of ambiguous. Like maybe we're seeing some plants off in the distance. I don't know. Maybe there's little sunlight beams coming through something in the background. Okay, so last little area here. And then right up here, got a nice little, tiny little triangle right there to add. Just take an inventory for a moment here. Drop a little bit there while that's drying. Might want to find a few places if you want to add a little bit of extra depth. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry. And then I'm going to do a little bit of color mixing to get ready for our next phase. So next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to get some greens mixed and we're going to get some whites mixed. We're going to just go ahead and start getting that ready. I'm just going to go ahead and clear off this blue. And I'll use kind of what's left there for this mixture. So got a little bit of that blue residue. Bringing some clean water to my palette here. I'll grab a little bit of yellow ochre, mix that in this puddle here. I want this to be just kind of very light, like, yeah, a little bit of blue, a little bit of yellow. It's gonna kind of make it a slightly warm green, kind of like a yellowish green. Kind of depends which direction you push it. A little more blue or a little more yellow. So yellow ochre, a little bit of indigo, and I'm just going to use this large brush and starting, I guess, actually before I do that, because I don't want to touch any of these edges. They're all still kind of wet, so we're going to be careful here. So before I do that, let's go ahead and get some green mixed. So I will probably use a couple of different colors today. I'm going to use Hooker's green. It's beautiful, kind of cool green color here, very kind of a jewelry emerald green. I love it, but I always mix things into it. Like I very rarely use like a bunch of it just in place. Usually I like to kind of mix it, dilute it, whatever you want to call it, just sort of take down that intensity. So I like to make a little bit of yellow ochre in there. So we'll use a little bit of that today. I will also just probably be doing various mixes where I lean really heavy into the yellow ochre. So you can see that hopefully you can see this. Got like a really yellow green here and then more of a cooler green right there. I might lean into some other greens, but for now I think that'll be great. I might use a little bit of olive green or sap green. And then as this is still drying, I'm going to go to this very center of our flower here, and then I will go ahead and use some yellow ochre. Make sure it's clean. Mine has a lot of green on it right now, so let me clean that off. I'm going to use my yellow ochre and then just diluting it just a little bit. Let's get a spot right here going. A little bit of yellow ochre, and then I'm going to go ahead and just paint this whole center area with yellow ochre. I'll go ahead and use my size 2 brush here. And I'm going to just go ahead and paint these little kind of squiggly little stamen that we're seeing here. So you can, make some of it kind of a lighter yellow and some of it can be a little bit darker. But mostly I'm kind of trying to keep it on the lighter side. Draw a couple little dots there. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to this watery mixture here. And I think starting right here, I'm going to go ahead and start dropping in some of this really watery mixture here on my petals. So I'm going to push this towards blue just a little bit here. And I'm dropping just this very diluted blue and yellow mixture. A little bit pushed towards blue. Very subtle. And so here I kind of have like the mixture of blue and here's kind of more of the yellow. You can kind of mix in between and, push the color towards whatever direction you want it to go. For me, this is all up dry up here, so I can work over here on this side. I'll come over here and work on this side once this is all dry. And this is a I would say that this kind of painting is, it's a mix between like a detailed and a loose painting. I think that there's elements of both. I think anytime you just have a sketch in general, it's going to be detailed. Like there's definitely some detail, but I'll say this, we're working with watercolor as it wants to be used. Watercolor wants to spread, it wants to move. And it's taken me a really long time to kind of learn that is like, don't fight it. I guess that's that's what watercolor, that's what it does. That's like where it shines, I think. And I think you can still create paintings that have a lot of thought and intentionality and fine detail, but they're not like tight and overworked and scratchy looking. And that's kind of what I'm always trying to accomplish in my paintings, is trying to find that kind of loose but really intentional kind of merging. Okay, so on this back side of the petal, notice that both of these, I'm dropping a little bit of extra dark color here where they're folding inward. I think I will push this one a little bit warmer. Also, just another note here on lighting. This painting, I would say that the light is coming from this direction. So we're going to be really mindful about kind of keeping the inside of the petals lighter, more on the white side. And then the back side of these petals, like what I'm painting right here, this is the back side of that petal. A little bit darker, a little bit more in shadow. Very subtle, but ever so slightly. So we got a warm light shining on these petals. So the back side of our leaves, I'm going to make them just a little bit more of like a blue color. Working over here on this petal. Work slowly here. If you've never painted white petals, it can be a little bit tricky. And I would say the trick is to just go slowly, build that color up slowly. Over here, this one's going to be pretty much in shadow here as well. So go ahead and get my yellow and blue mixture, and I can see green is trying to join the party over here as well. I should maybe I don't know. I love having just a big open palette like this, but there is something nice about having like the sections on a palette, because, you know, obviously watercolor tends to creep, and yeah, sometimes that can be an issue. Because now it's kind of starting to push my mix here into the green, and I don't actually want that to happen. So let me get that out of the way, and we'll get back to what we had here. So a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of indigo. Okay, and you know, those two together, it does kind of slightly create a green, but I think when you really push either towards the yellow or towards the blue, it doesn't feel that way. Okay, a little more blue right here in the center and between these two petals. Just want that part to be just a little bit darker. Okay, I'm going to work up here on this top part of the top part of this petal. I'm just going to go up right up to that edge with kind of this warmer. I'm pushing more towards the yellow right here. Cleaning my brush off. I like to kind of switch between a dry brush and a brush for dropping water. So I'll keep this one handy to do that. I'm going to grab more ochre. Okay. This is still drying here, so I think I'm going to work up here on my leaves. So I will go ahead and let's do some stems. So I'm just going to grab pure burnt sienna, just nice brown color. I'm lying actually. I'm gonna grab a little bit of Payne's Gray too. I always gotta do some mixing. Okay, so I'm grabbing a little bit of Payne's Gray, a little bit of burnt sienna, just to kind of take down some of the orange in burnt sienna. It's very, very warm. And I will go ahead and just paint these stems with my smaller brush. I'm using my size 2 brush. And you know what, here, I'm actually going to think about not fully covering all of the white. I'm kind of letting the left side of this branch, the white, just to shine through. It's a very subtle detail, but I don't want to cover up all the white on my paper. And I think that also even kind of helps to create the feeling of like light shining on this branch here. Go ahead and do this one here and the one just underneath it. So that's burnt sienna and a little bit of Payne's Gray. I'm just making all of my branches this color here. Okay. As that's drying, I'm going to grab another layer of that same mixture, just a little darker now. Payne's Gray, burnt sienna. And over here, I'm just going to go on the right side and just add like an extra dark kind of value to that branch. Okay, I'm going to go over to my leaves here. Bouncing around today. I don't typically do it this way, but you know, I kind of got to think about the fact that I'm painting this live and I want areas to dry, you know, as I'm working. So I'm going to do just this watery kind of green mix of ochre and hooker's green. And I'm just going to do a layer on this leaf here. I'll do the same thing right here. Actually, I'm going to do it on all of these leaves up here. You can use a smaller brush if you would like to. I like using a large brush. I like how it makes it very imperfect feeling, that there's some bleed over into the blue areas. I think it's a neat detail. It's a neat effect, I should say. I like for it to feel just a little bit scratchy and yeah, feels nice. Okay, I will now grab a little bit more green, a little bit more yellow. Let's darken this one here. It still feels a little bit more vibrant than I want. I want it to feel a little bit more desaturated, so grab a little bit more ochre. I might even grab a little bit of, I'll grab some burnt sienna because I'm going to be using that in a while anyway, so having this color mixed into the leaves is going to feel really natural. So a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, and mainly hooker's green. Okay. And I'm going to come over to, I guess I'll start over here. I'm just going to do kind of some little green details in here, some darker green details. I'm kind of thinking about like drawing a stem on my leaves, and then just like those little veins going to the right and left. Actually, I feel like using a smaller brush, where did it go? Oh, it's hiding. Using a smaller brush might be a good way to do this part here. Darken the side of that leaf a bit there. I'm going to smooth out some of what I just did with water, just a water brush. Kind of smooth that color, give it a little bit more of a feathering look. Trying to keep it all kind of loose, not trying to overwork any of these details here. Let's go over to this leaf here. And so using my size 2 brush, I'll drop in some color here. On this left side of this leaf, I'm going to go super dark because this is shadow. This part of the leaf is in shadow. So I'll just grab some sap green actually. Throw some sap green in there, some really dark green. And grab some more yellow here. You can see I'm doing a lot of kind of mixing as I go. I don't ever want my leaves to feel flat. I like to mix in a lot of color. Keep it interesting. Using a wet brush, I'm going to lift out just a little bit of that color. Keep it light on the right side. Okay, another fun little detail we're going to do. I want you to grab just some yellow ochre, just plain yellow ochre. Just going to paint this leaf right here yellow. And if it bleeds into that, that's fine. Mine just did. The back side of magnolia leaves are kind of more of like a orangey yellow color. You can even drop some burnt sienna there. So I'm just going to make the back side of that little leaf a little bit yellow, maybe a little bit right here on this leaf. And just in a couple places while it's still wet, just drop a little bit of yellow. Just because I think that I like to mix on the paper. I think it's a really fun effect. All right, so let me think here. We could keep on going with leaves or we could go back to the flower. I guess I have a lot of green in my brush right now, so I might as well use it. So let's just keep on going. So I will go ahead and just do that kind of lighter wash of wet on dry. So my paper is dry here mostly. So I'll go ahead and paint on these dry little leaves here. Yeah, this is all feeling very dry for me. I think the only part that's wet is still here, and then obviously the leaves. A little more water in my brush here. Okay. This one here, in my reference painting that I did, I made this side a little bit lighter. This leaf in general is just a little bit dark, a little bit lighter than this one. For whatever reason, maybe the light is just shining more fully. The sun is shining a little more fully on it. Grab a little bit more yellow ochre. Tiny bit of ochre mixed in there. Okay. For this one here, I'm going to drop in a bit more of my dark green mixture just underneath here. And then over here, dropping a little bit more dark green while it's still wet, letting it kind of bleed in there. This is the time to get any of those little bleeds you want to get in your leaves while they're still wet. Those ones dried so quickly. Wow. Yeah, there's not a whole lot I can do there, but that's okay. Okay. I think that feels good for the time being, and I think I will now move back to my magnolia. So I'll clean that off really well, and I will work on all petals except for this one, because this one is next to a very wet leaf. So let me clear some space on my palette again, just a little bit. And let's see. Sometimes you can just kind of use what you've already got. Like I see a little bit of burnt sienna here. You totally just use that as like your desaturated. There's a little bit of, add a little bit of blue to it. So a little bit of burnt sienna, or burnt umber, I should say. A little bit of burnt umber, a little bit of indigo. All right, I'll come back to this petal right here. Come all the way up to the petal next door, right there. Over here, same thing, trying to keep this side a little bit lighter and then have the darker color over here on the right side of that petal, and then same thing right there. Some of this needs to like dry for us to really kind of layer in some of the shadow. Right now it all kind of just wants to bleed together, and that's okay. So we'll kind of just make this the first pass, and we'll add some depth and shadow very soon. I'll go ahead and just drop in just a little bit right here, using a very damp brush here. I'll smooth that color in. Okay, so let's come back over here to our top petals. So I'm just using my damp brush here. There's just a tiny, tiny bit of paint in here, but I'm just gonna see how I can kind of move this color around just a little bit. Over here on this left side, or on the right side, sorry, I want to add a little bit more depth, a little bit more shading. I apologize if that leaf blowing sounds really loud. I did not expect them to be doing that today. There's very rarely people doing yard work on our street, like at least not in the houses next to us. Okay, so a little bit right here. This spot here, I want this to be like a nice like shadowed area. So I'm just adding some of that slightly more saturated paint pigment right there. Adding a bit more blue in there as well. I want there to be a bit more blue in this little area right here. A little bit more blue here as well. Okay, let's go up to this little flower here, the bud that hasn't opened yet. I'm going to do a pass of just, my palette is just getting like, it's hard. I think that's like one of the hard things about painting with white. It's just that your mix can really change and it can get really dark really easily. But trying to keep that color here is proving to be a little challenging today. So I kind of like this mixture of doing burnt umber with a little bit of indigo, but pushing it more towards the warm side, so a little bit more on the burnt umber side. Okay, so using this mix, I'm going to just go ahead and paint this entire little bud this color very, very light. If it's too dark, blot it right away. We don't want to go too dark too quickly. I'm going to drop this same color right here on this outer edge. This magnolia leaf right here, or this petal right here. And I would say this, I went a little bit darker than I wish I would have right here, so I'm going to just blot it while it's still wet, and that actually lifted out. Actually lifted out pretty nice. But yeah, you can tell, I mean, hopefully you can tell the difference between like white that has not been touched and like this white right here. Like this definitely feels a lot brighter. Okay, so I'm using a damp brush. And what I'm going to do now is I just kind of want to smooth out everything I've done so far on my petals. But just a little bit. And I'm not going to be able to really move that color a lot. that paper, or the paint is really, really sunk into the core of this paper. So you know, once it starts to dry, it becomes harder and harder to like try and lift or move or smooth. That's why a lot of people think of watercolors one of the least forgiving mediums, because once you cover something, like it's gone. I mean, you can try and scrub it, but that's not really, it's hard. You don't know for sure if you can do it, if you're going to be able to scrub it. And then there's also the risk of making your painting look really overworked by being like really, really scrubbed and stuff. So yeah, watercolors definitely is challenging. You know, when you paint with oils or acrylics, pastels, you can cover things. You know, you can repaint things, but not so with watercolor. I'm gonna smooth this out here. This leaf down here is dry for me. Okay, and then these are dry as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and start adding some of this depth just right in here. Okay, a little bit more shading over here on the left side of these leaves here, or these petals here. So we're starting to kind of create some form. You see that? Just kind of using the slightly darker version of this kind of white mix to kind of create some shading, some shadows. Trying to be really, really intentional and slow about how I do this. I don't want to go too dark too quickly. I don't want this to look like a gray flower. I want it to look white. And I want there to be like color in the shading. A lot of people, I see a lot of people when they do the shading. So mine, I like mine to be like really earthy colored. So I like kind of almost like a grayish brown color. But there's a lot of people when they paint white flowers, they will only use yellow, purple, blue. Like there's not like any mixing of like colors to get that gray. Personally, I like a more kind of, yeah, desaturated look. I don't like things to look too colorful. I don't know. I go back and forth, I guess. Sometimes it looks really nice. But yeah, I've been studying this book I have on flower painting. I think it's called The Best of Flower Painting. I got it at a book sale here in town. But there's just so many different ways that people paint flowers. So many different tastes and styles and applications and approaches. So there's definitely not just like a one formula. Okay, I'm going to add some more dark color right here. I want this petal here, which is kind of more, I feel like it's kind of where your eye kind of goes right away when you look at this painting, kind of the center of this magnolia. So I want to make sure I get that petal right. Here, I think I am going to drop just a tiny bit more of my blue mixture, slightly more on the blue side right here. And then in here, I think we need just a little bit more shading too. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry. I'm gonna come up to this little petal right here, add a little bit, or that little bud, go to my blue, add a little bit more brown to my mix here. And I think on this right side, I'm gonna drop a little bit of brown. And then a tiny bit just here along that line I drew. So it kind of looks like it might be opening soon. Take a little tiny bit of blue, drop that in there. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to move towards the center of my magnolia here. I'm going to grab some burnt sienna. I'm going to do kind of this pointed shape here in the center. And then around that, I'm going to do, using this just here, burnt sienna. I'm going to paint some little dashes around it. I'm going to grab some burnt sienna, or burnt umber, burnt something, and I'm going to drop burnt umber in there in a few places as well. Trying not to cover all the light. So, you know, go a little sparingly here. Maybe drop a little bit more burnt umber in this center, very centered part here, this pointed, very center, I guess it's like the piston, stamen. I'm never exactly sure what to call every single, you know, part of a flower. I'm not a botanist, I don't know. There, that looks nice. Okay, and then just a few more little, do a few more little dashes in here. Using my size 2 brush, my smaller brush. And I think one more detail I'm going to do here. I'm going to grab just some yellow ochre, just the original yellow that I did at the very beginning here. I'm just going to drop a little more yellow ochre because mine, I think it's so light underneath it that I'm mixing kind of a middle hue in here. So I went from very light to very dark, and I think we could just use some mid-tones. So I'm just going to drop in a little bit more of that medium value. That was the special sauce there. That's what it needed for sure. At least for my painting, that's what I feel like it needed. Okay, so I'm going to continue to let that dry, and I will move back to my leaves. So I think I'm going to keep using the same brush. I'll probably use this one here in a minute. And my mix here, Hooker's Green, yellow ochre. And I'm going to go ahead and just paint the center vein of this leaf here, some veins here. Trying to keep my movements quick. A little more shading on this upper side, just a little bit. I'm going to take a little bit of burnt umber, bring it over as well. Take down some of the intensity of my green here. So I'm just throwing a little bit of brown into the mix here. Like I told you, I like things to be a little bit desaturated. I like earth tones. Some floral painters will never use earth shades, like burnt sienna, yellow ochre, burnt umber. Some, floral painters will not use those colors because they don't feel like that's an accurate representation of what you see in botanicals. But I just love them. I love, 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 love earth shades. So that's just my preference, but. Okay, so now I'm going to use my wet, larger brush, just a damp, wet, larger brush, and I'm going to smooth out what I just did. While that paint is still wet, I can kind of get in there and move it around, move it exactly where I want it to be. Drop a little bit more of that green right in here. Over here, let's go ahead and paint the stem, or the vein, I should say. Paint the vein and then paint some side veins. Using this larger damp brush, smooth that out. Grab some of this more yellowy mixture here. So I like to kind of squint at my painting as I'm going, trying to decide what it needs. Using a damp brush here, just kind of lifting out some color here. Lifting it out in a few places. Dropping a bit more of this desaturated green color here along this bottom edge. Give it a nice kind of point to the end of it. Maybe I can articulate that center vein just a bit more with some of that darker paint. And as it's all wet, it's kind of fun to just see how the water sort of takes it and bleeds it, moves it around. Up here, I'll add a bit more. This one is dry, so now I gotta, the trick is if it's already dry, what you can do is just take your damp brush and you kind of get that effect of the bleed by just bringing some water to the top of that paint. Isn't that fun? I just love the way watercolor works. I love oil paintings and I love pastels. There's a lot of other mediums that I really enjoy, but nothing feels as good, at least to me, to work with as watercolor. There's something so satisfying about the way the water just bleeds and moves and flows. And sometimes I just have to go sit down. I just got to put watercolor down on paper. I don't even know what I'm going to draw. I'm just going to let colors bleed together in squares, and it's just so satisfying to me. So a few more places here. I think I want to see a little more depth. So I'm grabbing more of that green, more of the brown, mixing those two together. And let's just drop some drama in here. Just a few places here. Over here, let's go to these leaves. Got a little neglected here, so I'm going to draw some center veins. And then I'll use my larger brush, damp brush, so I blot it. And then just use that damp edge to activate that color, make it bleed and move around just a little bit, make it do something fun. I was watching this painter, I can't remember his name, Marcello something. I can't remember his name, but that he's like an Italian painter, but he always says that. He's like, okay, add water, make it do something, make it do something, make it do something. I'm like, yeah, totally. I love that. Like you're partnering with the water. It's like helping to paint the painting for you. Make it do something. Okay, I think that the leaves are good. I don't think that there's too much more I want to do. I can kind of keep adding some little moments of drama and low lights, highlights, all of that. Well, only low lights. I can't add highlights, but adding some little drama, darker values here and there. I like how this one is feeling. Colors are a little different than my original painting, and that's kind of always how it goes. It never turns out exactly the same way twice. But I'm going to use my small brush here and make sure it's really clean here of all the green. Okay, I'll come back to this brownish, bluish mixture, and I'm going to just drop in that color right there. Use my damp brush, smooth it out a little bit. Man, it's already been like 45 minutes. I'm glad I didn't sketch it out first too. I thought this class would go a lot faster. But yeah, painting white is not easy. It's not the easiest technique, so you definitely got to kind of take your time with it. Okay, so dropping some of that darker color, using a damp brush to smooth it out. Just adding some of these fine details to the end here. So one brush to drop color, and then the other one to just smooth it out a bit. So I'm just using this dark blue burnt umber mixture, or you can do yellow ochre and blue. Basically, if you just kind of mix two opposite colors, you're going to get a nice kind of desaturated color you could use. You could do yellow and purple, blue and orange, green and red. Okay. A little bit more there. And I'll smooth that out. I think think we're feeling good. I don't know if I want to add too much more. I think I could probably just do like a pure blue here. And like just a few of these little moments here, just drop in the tiniest bit of blue. I think that actually looks really nice. Kind of letting the water kind of pull it around. Use my damp brush and just do those final little tweaks, smoothing it out. Okay. I think that this is a good place to call it. Yeah, I'm actually really happy with this one. Very similar, right? Like not identical twins, but very similar. I think one detail, if I was to kind of add one final thing that I'm not going to add, but just kind of critiquing my own artwork here. I think that I could use a little, well, okay, I'm going to do it. You know what? Why not? I'm going to add some water right here. A bunch of it. I should say this. I'm going to spread it out far. I'm not like just globbing a ton of water. So it's like an actual puddle, but I'm just going to make it go far. So make sure it's fully saturated here. And then I'm going to add just a little bit more of our beginning color because I want to see more of a pop between my flower and the background. I want a little more contrast right there. So I am going to make this decision, and it's a good decision. Immediately, I'm like, yep, that's what was needed. Okay, and I did a lot of water because I want it to bleed out really naturally. I don't want there to be like a weird hard line right there. So because I added so much water all the way up to here, it gives it a ton of room to just kind of look really natural and kind of flow into the background really nicely. I think I want to do the same thing here just to kind of keep that natural kind of look to it. So I will just drop some water here as well. And then back here. Okay, so using that same mixture here, let's just do a little bit. And that really just helps, that really helps to just kind of make that magnolia pop. Okay. Let me think here if there's anything else I want to do before I wrap this one up. I think it feels really nice. So I'm going to let this one go. Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed painting along with me today. If you're interested in more regular tutorials, be sure to join me on Patreon. I do a monthly watercolor tutorial as well as a monthly drawing tutorial for everyone on the Blooms tier. And yeah, and on that tier, I also offer you monthly feedback of your artwork. If that's something that would be helpful for you in your artistic journey, I would love to be a resource for you. And besides that, I think I will say goodbye for today, and thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye.